What is the stupidest thing you thought as a child? I thought burglary was a profession and that criminals' shifts started when the sun set and they'd be on all night robbing houses. To calm my fears, I would put my blinds up a little, lay down in a pile of stuffed animals and freeze, staring out the window. My thought was I'd look like a doll, and if a burglar saw me through the window, they wouldn't realize I was a human, and then I could get up and call 911 when they looked away. I fell asleep in that stuffed animal pile every night for 2 years. Not me, but my son. He didn't want us to get a new TV because he liked the shows on the old one. When I was a kid, I thought ice cream sandwiches were literally 2 pieces of bread with ice cream in the middle. I really wanted one. I went to ask my mum if I could have one while she was napping, and she half-consciously said we didn't have any. I said, "That's okay. I'll make one." She said nothing. I quickly learned ice cream sandwiches were not, in fact, 2 pieces of white bread with a spoonful of vanilla ice cream in the middle. When I was about 6, I used to think sex was just a hug because my parents called it a special cuddle, and I knew it had something to do with the balls. So I thought when a man and women hugged, the balls went through the man's skin and into the woman's body. Then either came back or grew. I'm a little fuzzy on that detail, but I concluded that if 2 men hugged they would just swap balls, so I punched myself in the balls, went and hugged my brother for the ultimate prank. I asked him, "Do your balls hurt?" and he was like, "No." So realized I had just punched myself in the balls for no reason. I told him about this the other year and we laugh about it, but he is still very confused. That the eject button on my dad's car would send me flying through the roof. My dad told me that Tiger Woods had a brother called Lion Woods. I thought catching on fire as an adult is common because of all the fire safety in elementary and them beating stop, drop, and roll into our heads. When we were little, my twin sister was convinced that chicken, beef, etc. was produced by vacuuming the meat out of the living animal. The animal would then walk around all wobbly and meatless until more meat grew back. My address was 25,029. My parents told me that represented my mom's age, 25, and dad's age, 29, when they got married, and their 0 was for how many kids they had at the time. As a little kid I thought that rule, mum's age of kids, dad's age, applied to all home addresses. I would always see houses with addresses like 05785 or something and wonder how a 5-year-old married an 85-year-old and already had 7 kids. I thought Britney Spears wrote a song about my doctor. I'm not that innocent, translated to I'm not Dr. Addison. Like, okay Britney, I get it, you aren't my doctor lol. Sex was just making out with no clothes on. I noticed that I was able to jump off of the playground and land on my feet and be perfectly fine, so my child mind immediately decided I was a superhero and could land from any height and be perfectly fine. I went to my friend's house, jumped off his roof, and the next thing I remember is crying until my mum picked me up. I thought that every song that played on the radio was being performed somewhere live, and when you turned up the volume the singer would sing louder at her venue. I thought that any time any woman went to the hospital, it was to have a baby. My 98-year-old great-grandmother was in the hospital and all I wanted to know is when the baby was gonna get here. I thought people died by blowing the candles on their 100 years party. I couldn't fathom how thermoses worked. People told me that they keep hot things hot, and cold things cold. But I was like, how in the F does it know whether the thing inside it is hot or cold so as to keep it that way? Took me many a year to figure that out. Needs more tuber. I used to believe I could save up my hots and my colds to use them later. For example, if it was really hot outside, I would whisper, "Save up all these hots." Then when I would get cold, I would summon the extra hots by whispering, "Give me all my hots," and it was supposed to make me warmer. I'm sure this is pretty common, but I used to think before color TV everything was black and white. I remember as a child asking my nan what it was like when they saw color for the first time. That if two artists made a song together it must mean they are a couple. That the sun never set, and the night sky was just a giant, black tarp with holes poked into it, and the sunlight shining through made the stars. I had seen photos of some sperm cells and thought that their shape was pretty similar to a dickhead, gland's penis. This made me think that the dickhead is a sperm cell and every man has one sperm cell at a time. Whenever you have sexual intercourse, the dickhead just passes into the woman and your penis is left there without a head. I was told that God lived up in the sky. For some reason, the highest thing I could imagine was the pipe sticking out of the neighbor's roof. So I thought God lived in the pipe. When I was 3 or 4, I asked my dad where babies come from. I got whole sperm plus egg equals baby, which made some kind of sense. Then I asked where the sperm comes from, and he said it comes from the daddy's penis. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I stopped asking questions there, and had a mental picture of my dad peeing through a tea strainer and catching a little flopping tadpole, which he would then stuff into my mom's vagina. It took a few years before I was disabused of that notion, probably on the playground at school. When I was around 6, my mum's grandmother passed away and my dad's father passed away. I told my mom that her grandfather should marry my dad's mum so they wouldn't be lonely. I thought I could see air particles. I was just seeing floaters. I also thought I could just pull out my eyelashes. I was just hearing the pop of my entire eyelid being lifted and popping back into contact with the eye. I used to think that the money offering collected at church would be put into a huge cannon to be shot up to heaven for Jesus. There was a Skittles commercial where they put some Skittles in the ground and they grew into a Skittles tree. I tried growing a Skittles tree at the park for about 3 years before my family moved. Well, I thought for years the Smurfs were green. We lived in communist Poland and our once color TV turned into a mostly green, white TV over time. I was shocked, and a teenager, when I realized the Lilfers are a different color. Every year the trees in our yard would lose their leaves. Every year my dad raked up the leaves and put them into yard waste bags. With me so far? Kid logic dictated that my dad kept the bags of leaves in the shed, so he could glue them back onto the trees next spring. I did not grow up to become an arborist. I used to think black people couldn't speak. Bear with me here. I grew up in a very white neighborhood. The only black people I interacted with were my deaf foster sister and her deaf friends from her school for the deaf. So, in my short life, white people could hear and spoke with their voices. Black people couldn't hear and spoke with their hands. ASL. So naturally the first time a black person spoke out loud to me, I was like 4. My response was to freak out and yell, "You can talk?" All dogs were male. All cats were female. I had a fear of telescopes as I thought if I wasn't careful with them I'd be abducted by aliens. I used to play The Sims a lot. I thought that Harriet Tubman created an actual underground railroad, a locomotive train running underground that transported the slaves to freedom. I thought the do not pass or no passing signs on the side of the road meant you couldn't pass that sign. I thought Santa hated me because he didn't give me presents on Christmas. I'm Jewish and my parents didn't want me to be that kid who told his classmates that Santa doesn't exist, so I ended up believing in Santa until I was about 8, when I saw 2 mall Santas get into a fight in the parking lot of the mall. Food and drinks went down separate paths when swallowed, and when you choked on something that went down the wrong pipe it was because food went down the drink pipe or vice versa. Eating sliced bread would make me immortal. I thought I could literally grow up to become a dinosaur. I thought that in the state of Pennsylvania all buildings were made from pencils. So back in the 60s, there was a period where people were buying baby alligators as pets. Seemed like every store everywhere had baby alligators. Well, people quickly tired of them, and started flushing them down the toilets. In big cities, news stories about alligators living in the sewers proliferated. We lived close to NYC and frequently went there to visit family. My two older brothers convinced me, I was about 7 that the alligators in the sewers would get me if I wasn't careful. Having seen the news stories already, I totally believed this. So every time we went to NYC, I would circle around every sewer grate. I can only imagine what my parents thought of this. Good times.